Greetings, my name is Julie Morris, and this presentation is entitled Perception as a Mode of Knowing. The focus for illustrative purposes is the sense of sight with an emphasis on color. The approach that serves as the backbone for this project is a phenomenological approach. The primary work utilized here is found in Maurice Merleau-Ponty's work entitled The Primacy of Perception. Maurice Merleau-Ponty lived from 1908 to 1961 in France. He wrote extensively on politics, art, and phenomenology. He was influenced by Husserl, Heidegger, and Gestalt psychology. The work that I focus on here, The Primacy of Perception, was an address given in 1946 and summarizes the major theses of his phenomenology of perception. For Merleau-Ponty, there is no destruction of the absolute or of rationality in this account, but only of an absolute or rationality sundered from experience. Let's go over a few background ideas behind phenomenology. Intentionality is the concept that every act of the mind is object-directed. There are two attitudes our mind takes. The first is the normal attitude, which is how we are in the world experiencing through our senses what is available to us. The second is the philosophical or phenomenological attitude, where we step aside from our experiencing of the object to view, consider, and analyze the experiencing itself. To enter into the phenomenological attitude, we must bracket the natural act of the mind, and instead focus on the structure of the intentional act. The noesis is the act of intentionality and the form it takes. For example, whether it is of remembering, hoping, or perhaps imagining. Noema is that which is intended, or the object. I want to discuss a few background ideas with regard to perception. These 4 points come directly from Dr. Yates's notes on the problem of perception, summing it up, and I think serve very well the foundation of perceptual consciousness. Perceptual consciousness is never purely subjective. Perceptual consciousness never stands alone. Perceptual data exist where they are experienced as existing and nowhere else. Perceptual consciousness seems to put us in contact with many non-selves. In the next slide, I provide a visual illustration of these points. I thought it would be appropriate to use the Eiffel Tower to illustrate these points, considering that my primary source lived in France. As I said earlier, my main mode for concept illustration will be visual. The first point is that perceptual consciousness is never purely subjective. The height, size, and position of the tower are not subjective. There is a reason that everyone perceives the Eiffel Tower to be tall and grand, and that is because it is. The second point is that perceptual consciousness never stands alone. The tower has a background, and by this I mean a backdrop as well as a history or relation. The backdrop includes what I see, such as a blue or gray sky, a variety of buildings, and few or many surrounding people, depending on the circumstances. But there is also a context of meaning in total, as well as for each subject who experiences it. This is a relational aspect. The third point is that perceptual data exist where they are experienced as existing and nowhere else. I may be standing underneath the tower, or standing high upon the platform, or I may be remembering my visit or listening to my daughter describe her experience. The data exist where I experience it and not someplace else. The fourth point is that perceptual consciousness seems to put us in contact with many non-selves. My experience of this tower includes my experience through others. Perhaps this will be shared in conversation as we ascend the elevator, or perhaps I will read the experience of others in a book or magazine. But in this perceptual consciousness, I am put in contact with others. These three main ideas also come from Dr. Yates' lecture on Summing It Up, the problem of perception. This goes along very well with the primacy of perception. The first point from Merleau-Ponty: the world is reached as it is to us, and we cannot access it in any other way. The scholastic's view would be similar, as that we know objects as they affect us. The world as it is for us is the world in itself. In this slide, I have three pictures of the ocean. As Monsieur Merleau-Ponty says, the world is reached as it is to us. Take the perspective of each of these individuals in the pictures of the ocean. The ocean is reached differently for each person in this picture. In the first picture, the person is seeing the waves, focusing on the white foamy crest contrasted with the deep blue. In the top picture on the right, the ocean is more likely seen as white, foamy, distant, and turbulent, with a steep cliff separating them from the water. In the bottom right picture, we see a man seeing the water as much as he sees the sand and shore. The ocean is known to each of these people as they are affected by it. In this slide, we see the ocean itself. The world as it is for us is the world in itself. The ocean is all of these pictures in all these manifolds of experience. The ocean exists as it is for each person, whether I experience each aspect or not. One of Merleau-Ponty's big ideas in this work is that matter is pregnant with its form, which is to say that in the final analysis, every perception takes place within a certain horizon and ultimately in the world. It is clear that he sees a separation between form and matter, though his idea of form does not seem to be quite the same as it is for Aristotle or St. Thomas. Form for Aristotle is the essence, and form and matter are not the same thing. For St. Thomas, form is the soul. This big idea serves as a foundation for how perception brings you in contact with essence. Part of what it means for matter to be pregnant with its form includes the entourage or setting of what is perceived. Understanding the entourage allows one to see the perceived itself better. Perspective of objects. The size of the tree in the distance is not perceived as small, but as large. And in one aspect, the true color of the object is not based entirely on the color of the setting or the lighting in a particular perception. To further elaborate, Merleau-Ponty said, "It is necessary that meaning and signs, the form and matter of perception, be related from the beginning, and that, as we say, the matter of perception be pregnant with its form." These four pictures are illustrations of the two examples that I used in the previous slide. The two pictures on the left are of the trees, and the two illustrating the color. The picture on the top left corner is of trees going down a path. In the perspective of the drawing, the trees in the back, you might say, appear smaller than the trees in the front. Yet if we were to walk down that path, we would not perceive the trees in the back to be smaller, and we would be much surprised if in fact they were. The picture on the bottom left shows the picture of trees interposed on the moon. Yet as I perceive those trees, and I perceive the moon, I do not perceive them as the same size, though in the picture you might say that the shapes are of similar size. The two pictures on the right illustrate how the perception of color works. The top right-hand corner shows the flowers as the sun is rising or setting. The color of the yellow is not as brilliant as the color in the bottom right-hand corner in full daylight. Yet we perceive the color yellow of those flowers to be similar, whether we look at it in the dark or whether we look at it in the bright. As we discuss the illustration of these four pictures, that brings up the point that the perception is a perception of the whole. Perception here is understood as a reference to a whole which can be grasped, in principle, only through certain of its parts or aspects. The perceived thing is not an ideal unity in the possession of the intellect, like a geometrical notion, for example. It is rather a totality open to a horizon of an indefinite number of perspectival views which blend with one another according to a given style which defines the object in question. The viewing of the trees or of the color of the flowers is not based on merely one perspectival view, but is put together according to a given style to blend together to give a whole. As we consider the perspectival views and the many that we might have, or the few, and how that relates to the perception of the whole, Merleau-Ponty brings up the concept of immanence and transcendence and how that relates to perception, and he says, there is a paradox of immanence and transcendence in perception. Immanence, because the perceived object cannot be foreign to him who perceives. Transcendence, because it always contains something more than what is actually given. And these two elements of perception are not, properly speaking, contradictory. Thank goodness for time. True is not for this moment only. For example, the sunflower that is bright yellow in the full sun is still bright yellow when the sunlight fades. And in my perception, though in one sense I do not see it as bright yellow, in another sense I do. Merleau-Ponty says, in similar vein, when I think the Pythagorean theorem and recognize it as true, it is clear that this truth is not for this moment only. Yet there are later developments. As I witness the sunflower many times, I will see many more opportunities to see what the color yellow is of a sunflower. The sunflower is bright yellow in the sun and darker at dusk, yet both are true, though partial, and together nearer the whole. Merleau-Ponty says, regarding the Pythagorean theorem example, later developments would not annul the Pythagorean theorem, but would put it back in its place as a partial and also an abstract truth. The purpose of this video is to illustrate time and how it relates to perception in partial and nearing the whole. The manifold of experience is increased in profile from the experience from the beginning, and as continuous time is added, the perception of this space changes as it approaches the whole. So how is perception related to ideas? Merleau-Ponty says the certainty of ideas is not the foundation of the certainty of perception, but is rather based on it. In this sense, all consciousness is perceptual, even the consciousness of ourselves. In one sense, it is through this experience that we have the idea of being, and it is through experience that the words rational and real receive a meaning simultaneously. This is not to say that the objects are not real when they are not experienced, or that they become real when experienced by men, as if by knowing them to be real makes them so. Reality exists whether it is experienced or not, yet it is through sense experience that there is knowledge of the real and what it is to be real. In conclusion, by these words, the primacy of perception, we mean that the experience of perception is our presence at the moment when things, truths, values are constituted for us. The perception is a nascent logos, that it teaches us, outside all dogmatism, the true conditions of objectivity itself, that it summons us to the tasks of knowledge and action.